Hello students, this week let's review about rates and unit rates involving rational numbers. So what is a rate? So a rate is a ratio, still a ratio, that compares two quantities using different units of measure. Now this could be in miles, this could be in hours, this could be in gallons. So there's a lot of different units of measure. Now, a unit rate now is a comparison of a quantity to one unit. For example, we have $30 per hour, or we can have 20 miles per hour. So per means one for every. Now, equivalent rates have the same unit rate. That's how we compare if the rates are the same. So let's start with number one. Number one says find the unit rate. Now, how do we find the unit rate? To find the unit rate, we just divide the denominator, okay? So we're just gonna be dividing most of the time. Now, sometimes it could be multiplying. Now, I'll show you that in a few minutes. Number one, it says 165 miles in 3 hours. Notice the units of measure used would be miles compared to hours, right? So we have 165 miles. It's very important when we write our rates that we include the units of measure so that we know what these numbers represent, okay? So 165 miles over 3 hours, in 3 hours. So how do we get the unit rate? When we say unit rate, it means 1 hour, okay? So now we're going to divide this by what? By 3. Because the question is, how did we get 3 to become 1 hour? We're dividing. So we're actually just dividing 165 divided by 3. So we're just dividing these. Now, if we divide this, 165 miles divided by 3, that should give us 55 miles for 1 hour. Or you can write it in a sentence says 55 miles per hour. The word per means for every. So that means we don't need to put 1 here, but if you want to, it's okay. Now, let's try to do number 2. Remember, I said we're going to be doing um, rational numbers. So 1/2 ounce for every 2 cups. So write as a fraction, 1/2 ounce for every 2 cups. Now remember, we are actually just dividing this, okay? So why are we dividing it? Because we need to get the unit rate. So we need to get 1 cup. So how did we divide 2 to get 1 cup? So we're dividing 2 by 2. That means we're going to divide 1/2 by 2. So technically we're doing is 1/2 divided by 2. Now remember, if it's a whole number, it has a denominator of 1. So that means that we need to keep, change, and flip. Multiply by its reciprocal. So this becomes 1/2 times 1 over 2. And that should give us 1/4. So this becomes 1/4 ounce. So our answer will be, if it's written in a sentence, would be 1/4 ounce per cup. So don't get confused. We're actually just dividing 1/2 and 2 to get the unit rate of 1 cup. Okay, so review this process. Now, number 3. We have 3/4 per 1/2 ounce. So 3/4 is the unit of measure for 3/4, and the ounce would be for the 1/2. So let's write this as a fraction. So 3/4 quart, that's a Q, over 1/2 ounce. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. Remember, as I said, it's either we can divide or multiply to get the unit rate. Especially with the rational numbers, there's a lot of ways to do it. So I'm going to show you 2 ways. So first way would be to multiply. I'll show you. So 3/4 quart over 1/2 ounce. And we need to make this into a 1 ounce, right? Because it's a unit rate, means compares to 1 unit. So how do we get 1/2 to become 1? And of course, we double it. We multiply by 2, right? So we multiply this by 2. Remember a whole number has a denominator of 1. So 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 times 1 is 2, and that is equal to 1 ounce. Now let's do the numerator. So 3 times 2 gives us 6 over 4 times 1 gives us 4. Let's simplify. Always simplify. So the common factor for 6 and 4 that we can divide evenly would be 2. 6 divided by 2 will give us 3, and 4 divided by 2 will give us 2. So this would be 3 over 2 quarts. So our answer would be 3 over 2 quarts per ounce. Now, sometimes your book or your textbook might ask you to change this into a mixed number. So you could also say 1 1/2 quarts per ounce. That would be the same. So how many times 2 go into 3? One time, and the leftover is 1, and the denominator stays the same. Don't forget. Now, let's do division, because for on this right side, we did multiplication, right? Now on this side, we're going to do division, and I'll show you why you'll get the same answer. So if we're going to get the unit rate for this ounces. So this should be 1 ounce. And how did we divide 1/2 to get one? And we're dividing 1/2 by itself. So we're dividing 1/2 divided by 1/2. So that means at the top we also need to do the same. 3/4 divided by 1/2. So 1/2 divided by 1/2 gives you 1. A number divided by itself gives you 1. Now the top, the numerator would be 3/4 divided by 1/2. Now remember, when you divide, it's the same thing as keep, change, flip, or multiplying by its reciprocal. So this becomes 3/4 times 2 over 1. Notice how oops, not that one. Notice how this expression is the same thing as what we did here. 3/4 times 2 over 1. So 3/4 times 2 over 1. So you will get the same answer, which is 6 over 4. Then we can simplify that. We're dividing by 2. So 3 over 2 quarts. So we still have the same answer. 3 over 2 quarts per ounce, or 1 1/2 quarts per ounce. So don't get confused. If you want to stick with division, that's fine. Now let's do number 4. Tell whether the rates are equivalent. Now, when do we know if the rates are equivalent? When the unit rates are the same. So let's try to get the unit rates of each of these statements to tell whether these rates are equivalent. So I'm going to cut this screen in half. So the first one would be 9 miles for every 1/2 hour. And the second one would be 6 miles for every 20 minutes. Now, what do you notice? When we compare rates, make sure that the units of measure are the same. So we're comparing miles an hour, but the other one would be miles and in minutes. Although the hour and in minutes pertains to time, but we need to make sure that the units of measure are the same. Are we going to use minutes or are we going to use hours? Which one is easier for you? So it depends on how you approach it. So for this example, let's change this hour to minutes. So make it easier. So 1/2 hour is the same thing as saying what? 30 minutes. So 9 mile, oops, or you say 9 mile, oh no, cancel, 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 cancel. Okay, 3, 2, 1. So let's get the unit rates of each statement to tell whether the rates are equivalent. So for this first statement, we have 9 miles for every 1/2 hour. For the second statement, we have 6 miles for every 20 minutes. Now, although the miles are the same, but these two have different units of measure. Although they pertain to time, but they have different units of measure because one is in hour and one is in minutes. So for this example, we're going to get the unit rate for the hour. So for 1 hour. Now 1 hour is 60 minutes, right? So make sure you make sense of the problem. So I'm going to cut this screen in half and let's solve for each unit rate. So I'll start with the 9 miles. 9 miles for every 1/2 hour. So how could we change 1/2 hour to 1 hour? There's two ways. Either we multiply by 2 or we divide by 1/2. For this case, it's easier to multiply by 2, right? So we multiply by 2. Now remember, when dividing is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. So that's what we're doing. This is easier because if you double 1/2, it will become 1 hour. So now let's multiply 9 times 2. That should give us 18 miles per hour. So the rate for the first statement is 18 miles per hour. Now don't get confused that I didn't multiply it by 1 because 18 has a denominator of 1. It's the same thing. So the rate for the first statement is 18 miles per hour. Now let's move on to the second statement. It says 6 miles for every 20 minutes. Now, what do we know about hours and minutes? We know that 1 hour is equal to 60 minutes. So that means how can we multiply or how can we make 20 minutes become 60 minutes? And you're absolutely right. We multiply by 3. So we're multiplying by 3 because, not that one. We're multiplying by 3 because 3 groups of 20 minutes would give us 60 minutes or 1 hour. It's the same thing. 6 times 3 will give us 18 miles. So the rate is 18 miles in 1 hour or per hour would be the same thing. So these rates are equivalent. Now, for the second example, we're going to use division. So you'll see the difference. Now, let's compare the rates. Are the rates the same or not? The first rate would be 2/5 gram for every 3/10 serving. The second rate is 5/2 grams for every 1/5 serving. Again, I'm going to cut this screen in half. So the first one was 2/5 gram for every 3/10 serving. Let's get the unit rate by getting 1 serving. Now, how do we do this? We divide by its denominator, right? If you divide the denominator by itself, you would get 1. Whatever you do at the bottom, you do at the top, just like how we got unit rates. Now, when we divide, let's focus on the top, okay? Because we already know that the bottom numbers would equal to 1. A number divided by itself would give us 1. So let's focus at the top, the numerator. So 2/5 divided by 3/10 would be the same thing as saying 2/5 times 10/3. Remember, keep, change, flip, multiplying by its reciprocal. Now, cross cancel. If you don't like cross canceling, it's fine, but it's easier. Look at the top numerator and opposite denominator. What number can you evenly divide to 10 and 5? And we know it's going to be 5. So 10 divided by 5 would give us 2. Oops, that's not clear. Let's use this one. Would give us 2. And then 5 divided by 5 will give us 1. Now we can multiply straight across. 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 3 is 3, or a mixed number, how many times can 3 go into 4? 1 time. What's the leftover? 1. The denominator stays the same. So 1 and 1/3 grams per serving. So the answer would be 1 and 1/3 grams per serving. If you want to use the improper fraction, that's okay. Now, if you ask me, what if I don't like cross simplifying? Can I just multiply straight across? Of course you can. This is how it looks like. So 2 times 10 would be 20 over 5 times 3 would be 15. You still need to simplify this by dividing a factor into 20 and 15, and we know it's 5. So that's going to give us 4 over 3, which is the same case at the top. So the answer for the first one, for the first statement, is 1 and 1/3 grams for every serving. Let's do the second statement. It says 5 over 2 grams for every 1/5 serving. Again, we're getting the unit rate, 1 serving. So how did we get 1/5 to become 1? So we're dividing it by itself. So we're dividing by 1/5. We're dividing by 1/5. So that becomes a 1. So let's focus at the top. Okay, so it's the same thing. 5 over 2 divided by 1/5 would be 5 over 2 times 5 over 1, because we do keep, change, flip. Now let's multiply straight across because we can't cross simplify. So that's going to be 25 over 2, or what's half of 25? And that's going to be what? 14, not 14, 12 and 1/2. So 12 and 1/2 grams. So 12 and 1/2 grams per serving would be the answer on the second statement. Now, are the rates equivalent or not? And the answer is not equivalent. Review if you need to. So let's try to do the next problem. The directions on a container of lemonade mix say to use 5 scoops of lemonade mix for every 10 quarts of water. So that is our rate. So 5 scoops of lemonade mix, I'm going to use LM, for every 10 quarts of water. So that is our rate. Now let's do letter A. It says, how many quarts of water should you use for every scoop of lemonade mix? So what we're looking for would be the quarts of water. So we're looking for quarts. Oops, let's use the yellow. We're looking for how many quarts of water for 1 scoop of lemonade mix. So how do we set it up? Now it's up to you, but usually when we write the unit rate, the unit 1 should be at your numerator. So for this case, so let's switch this up. So we can put 10 quarts of water for every 5 scoops of lemonade mix. Now, why did we switch this up? Because our unit rate is the scoop of lemonade. So we got 1 scoop of lemonade. Now, some of you would say, can I just not flip it? I mean, that's fine as long as your unit of measures are with the quantity, the value, okay? Now, so 5 scoops of lemonade mix becomes 1 scoop of lemonade mix because we're looking for the number of quarts of water for 1 scoop of lemonade mix. So we're dividing by what? By 5. So we're just doing 10 divided by 5, and that gives us, yep, 2 quarts of water per scoop of lemonade mix. So our answer would be, oops, let me write that in a sentence. Our answer would be 2 quarts of water per scoop of lemonade mix. Okay? Number two, letter B, not number two, letter B. How many scoops of lemonade mix should you use for every quart of water? So what are we looking for? We're looking for the scoops of lemonade for every quart of water. Now, what do we know? We know that there's 5 scoops of lemonade mix for every 10 quarts of water. And now what we're looking for would be the number of scoops of lemonade mix. And we do know that we will have a unit rate of 1 quart of water. So, how do we go about this? 10 to become 1, we're dividing by 10. 5, we divide by 10. So 5 divided by 10 is the same thing as saying 5 over 10. And we can simplify that by dividing 5 to the numerator and denominator, and that's 1/2. So 1/2 scoop of lemonade mix for every quart of water. Hope that helps.